One of our focuses is to try to make enormous progress in what we're doing in the lab now and in patients to perhaps one day make insulin no longer needed. And that would require a complete game shift in the management of diabetes. This is the islet cell transplant that we carry out with the patients with type 1 diabetes. We put an injection in the side, we put the cells up into the liver through that vein there, which is called the portal vein. And it's a very simple transplant. You don't need 20 years of transplant surgery training to hold a transplant bag and drip the cells in like this. It's very simple. Last week we had a team visiting us from China. We're helping them set up an islet cell transplant program, so they were very fortunate to see an islet transplant happening in real time there with the patient on the table. We're very happy with the progress we've made with islet cell transplantation, but we know there's lots of shortcomings with that treatment as well. Patients require powerful anti-rejection drugs, and there's a shortage of organ donors. That means that we won't have enough cells once we get to a point where we could potentially treat everybody with type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Now I'll move on to the stem cell transplant trials that we've been carrying out in Edmonton. And we started this transplant trial last year. Here's the very first patient in Edmonton being wheeled down the corridor to the operating room. Here are the cells arriving from San Diego. Is that the cells in this very first trial were prepared in what's called an immuno-isolation device, which is supposed to separate the cells from the immune system to allow them to be transplanted with no or very minimal anti-rejection drugs. And we've learned a lot so far. We've learned that after 3 months after the implants, the cells are indeed surviving. They do exactly the same thing in patients as they do in mice. They turn into insulin-producing cells. But so far we've put very minimal amounts of cells into patients, not nearly enough really to make a difference in the diabetes. This is a first-in-human trial designed to show that this is safe. And we've just heard a couple of days ago now that from Health Canada that we have approval to do our next phase trial with ViaCyte. Now I'm going to move on to a completely different approach where we're trying to use the body to heal itself, regeneration in patients just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Using the body's CD34 stem cells. Now these stem cells are found in the bone marrow. Everybody has them. But we have a drug called plerixafor. And when we give that drug, it makes these stem cells come out of the bone marrow and go into the circulation. This is a drug that's used normally in some bone cancers when they do bone marrow transplants. But here, we're trying to use that to put these regenerating cells out into the blood circulation in a patient that's just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And there, they'll circulate round to the pancreas. They'll find the islets that are inflamed, and they will help repair them. And what we have in this trial is complicated, but we have a process that will reset the immune system, add growth factors that will repair and regenerate the pancreas, plus that drug that I showed you. And we hope that we will be able to sustain and reverse diabetes in many patients with this approach. We're going to begin that process in adults, then we're moving it on to children. It's fully approved by Health Canada and by our ethics board. We've had to wait a long period of time for those drugs to arrive, and they're basically just arriving now. So we'll be looking in the next months to find suitable patients to enter in that exciting trial. Finally, I'll mention the approach of IPS technology. This is a personalized medicine approach, which I think will in the future make a big difference across all areas of medicine. And the idea here is that we can take any cell and we can expand it, regenerate it back into islets or nerves, perhaps for some nerve cell transplant trials, or muscle or whatever, or heart, whatever it is, that using regenerative medicine. So finally, I'll just show you, this is the headline from the Toronto Daily Star in 1923. Toronto doctors on track for diabetes cure. I think we're a long way forward than we were in 1922, and we have many, many opportunities today that will translate into a robust, solid cure for diabetes over the course of time. An ultimate cure is within our grasp. I see that very clearly, and it will happen within our time. It needs research ideas, it needs funding. We can't do any of this kind of work without funding to be able to drive it forward. And then we need a dedicated team of individuals that have the time, the effort, and the teamwork, and the will to accelerate the process so that we can deliver a treatment for you tomorrow that you so desperately need. On behalf of my team in Edmonton, and it's a large team that are involved both in the clinical side and in the lab side, and all of our funding agencies, I want to say a very big thank you to you for having me here today. Thank you very much indeed.